Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us at Oblong Online. I'm Suzanna Hermans, co-owner of Oblong Books in New York's Hudson Valley. Tonight, we are thrilled to host Caseen Gaines, author of Footnotes, the Black artist who rewrote the rules of the Great White Way. Caseen is an author, director, educator, and popular culture historian. His previous books include The Dark Crystal, The Ultimate Visual History, We Don't Need Roads, the making of the Back to the Future trilogy, and several more. His writing has been published in Vanity Fair, IO9, and New York Magazine, Rolling Stone, and others. He holds a master's degree from Rutgers in American Studies, where he focused on racial representations in popular culture. In addition to writing, Caseen is also co-artistic director of a nonprofit theater company he co-founded in 2005, and a high school English teacher in New Jersey, where he's taught for 14 years. If you have any questions for Caseen at any time during the presentation, you can throw them in the chat or use the Ask a Question module at the bottom of your screen. For those of you who'd like to purchase a signed copy of Footnotes, there's a Buy the Book button at the bottom of your screen. This event is presented in partnership with the Center for Performing Arts at Rhinebeck, our local community theater, and a portion of proceeds from our sale of Footnotes will benefit the theater. Managing Director Lou Sherpani is going to say a few words before we get started. Lou?
Hey, well, I don't want to talk too long because I want to make sure there's enough time to you guys to chat. You know, Suzanna was a director and a young actor here back in like 2000. The Rhinebeck Unplugged Student Theater, right? Weren't you part of that?
Absolutely,
yeah,
big
so
time.
We go back way. Yeah, and Susanna's mom, Priscilla, performed here many times. So this is I think this is the oldest partnership that the center has had with Oblong Books. And certainly I've been shopping at Oblong before it opened in Rhinebeck, in Millerton. So the Center for Performing Arts is very happy to say that it's all inclusive. That's why this conversation is so important. We make it paramount that we celebrate art and artists of all backgrounds and cultures. We continue to do that. It's a primary mission, and I'm happy to co-host this. We really didn't do that much other than me just dropping in and chatting. So you guys go ahead and talk about this great book, and thank you.
Thank you, Lou. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks, Lou.
Bye.
Lou's the best. I really, truly did grow up at the center. That was where I spent every summer in high school and half the school year too. So,
is that where you fell in love with theater?
What's that?
Is that where you fell in love with theater?
I fell in love even earlier. I was about 10. I did my first at a different community theater that has since moved locations. But yes, community theater. It's where it happens. You know, for so many of us who don't get to pursue a career, you know, we still have that lifelong love. Oh, I'm so thrilled. I'm so thrilled to get to talk to you, Caseen.
Oh, I'm happy to talk to you too. I'm excited.
I first became aware of your work when you did your Back to the Future book, because that is my favorite movie. And I immediately followed you on Instagram and have been enjoying your exploits ever since. So when I saw that you were writing a book about theater, my brain exploded. I was so excited. And
I appreciate that. Thank you.
It's here. It's here. It's in real life. It exists. It's been out for several weeks now.
Yeah, I think it's about 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks or something like that. And it came out right around the time of the centennial of Shuffle Along. So it's the 1921.
Perfect.
So yeah, it's amazing. I still envision it as a Word document in my computer. So it's kind of weird to like be able to hold a book in my hand, but that feeling never gets old for sure.
I bet. Oh my goodness. So how did you come to this story? And how did you choose to move away from the world of Hollywood and focus on theater?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, because I have always just been attracted to really interesting stories about popular culture. And whether it was books, whether it was film, television, theater, I've loved theater my entire life. And so it's funny because Footnotes to me feels like a real departure from everything else that I've written. But in a way, it's still just an interesting story about entertainment and how entertainment is shaped by society and how entertainment in turn shapes society. So I would say the biggest difference for me in terms of the writing was that I couldn't really interview too many people. I had to kind of do my research in different ways, and that was interesting. Footnotes is my 5th book, and in a way it feels almost like my first in a strange sort of way. But I really became interested in this story when I saw George C. Wolfe's 2016 reimagining of Shuffle Along. I call it a reimagining because there was very little of the actual show from 1921 in Wolfe's production, but it was really kind of a show within a show kind of conceit. And I saw the penultimate performance of that, and afterwards there was a talk back with some of the actors. Brian Stokes Mitchell, I remember, definitely was there. He is in my head for sure. And the actors just felt, I got such a funereal vibe in the show. I mean, I go to Broadway quite a bit, and I had never really had an experience like I had seeing Shuffle Along. In a way, I'm almost going to say, for almost all the wrong reasons. I left feeling sad when I saw the show because the actors seemed so sad that the show was closing the very next day. And when I got home, that experience really just stuck with me, and I started Googling like you do when you see something that sort of has an impression on you. And I guess there were 2 things that really struck me. One was discovering that Langston Hughes had the opportunity to study abroad in Europe, but he chose instead to go to Columbia University because he wanted to see Shuffle Along. And he credited Shuffle Along with kickstarting the Harlem Renaissance. So to me, that was like a mind-blowing thing. And the second thing was discovering that Josephine Baker actually got her start in the entertainment industry in Shuffle Along. And so, once I realized that these kind of giants of Black culture intersected with this show, and it was a show that was frankly largely off my radar, I was like, well, how could that be? How could it be that something that so many people intersected with is sort of this forgotten thing? And even this 2016 production is closing after just 100 performances. And, as a writer, like that in and of itself was interesting enough for me. And then there were so many interesting things the deeper I dug.
That's fabulous. I also saw the 2016 production, and it's really extraordinary to discover that in something that you love so much, like Broadway, there's so much history that wasn't ever told. Mm-hmm. And this is something that I have a little bookshelf in my house of all like the niche theater books that I'm going to read when I retire, when I have all the time in the world. And I was glancing at it the other day and I went, oh my God, these are all stories about white people. Mm-hmm. There just isn't any documentation in the way like your book is now about artists of color and Black artists in particular. So were you thinking about that at all as you were writing this book, like realizing you were kind of, I don't know every book that's come out, so I can't say that you were the first to tell this type of a story, but you're certainly one of the few.
Well, I'm going to tell you something that, to be honest with you, only about like 3 people in the world know, and now everyone listening will also know. But believe it or not, this project actually started in a way as a book really about, I was going to look into the history of West Side Story, and I was really interested in looking at New York and how West Side Story sort of came to be this watershed moment for representation. And it felt like, and I conducted some interviews for it. I spoke to Chita Rivera and Debbie Allen. I mean, if I could just drop some names here. And so I actually did some work on this. And as I was working on it, I felt like there was actually a more interesting story to tell about diversity in Broadway more broadly. And somehow in broadening it, it led me to narrow the focus to Shuffle Along in a way, because it seemed like what occurred with West Side Story, what occurred with Porgy and Bess and The Wiz, certainly, like Shuffle Along was really the first show to really have that kind of impact. And then there were other shows that had similar, Hamilton is of a similar mold, but it isn't of a new mold, and so I really was interested in doing that. And I think for me, there are lots of books that exist about Black Broadway history or things like that. And they're all sort of, or I shouldn't say they're all, from what I've seen, they are mostly surveys of, 1900 to 1920 or things like that. And, each show has maybe, 20 pages or so if you're lucky. I hadn't seen anything that really looked at a singular Black Broadway show ever. I mean, I just hadn't seen that book. Maybe it exists and people, can yell at me in the comments and say, how do you not know about it? But I really wanted to look at a singular moment and use it not as the example, but an example of what Black artists have gone through in order to gain representation on Broadway throughout history, and still continue to, I should add.
Yeah. So that's a good time to sort of break it down for folks who haven't read the book yet. What was Shuffle Along, and who are Sissel and Blake, and why should we care about them?
Yes, well, you should care about them because it's my life's work. No, you should. So Shuffle Along was it was really like the first all Black Broadway show to succeed on Broadway. And in fact, when I say all Black, I mean the writers, the musicians in the orchestra pit, conductor, composer, lyricist, the entire cast, of course. And so it was an all Black production through and through. And while I sort of make the distinction to say the first Black production to succeed on Broadway, in a lot of ways, it really qualifies as the first Black production on Broadway in the way that we think about what that means in terms of being in a venue of a certain size and commanding a certain ticket price. Shuffle Along has that distinction, even though there were other shows, certainly shows of Williams and Walker, that had played on the street before. So this was a real watershed moment in 1921. It was a horrible time for the theater industry. More than half of Broadway was dark at the time. New York was really dealing with the aftermath of the World War, Prohibition, recession, pandemic 100 years ago. And New York was struggling. And Shuffle Along ended up being the premier tourist attraction, bringing people into Manhattan. And it really was unique in that Black and white audiences enjoyed the show. And even so much so that 63rd Street became a one-way street because traffic was so congested when it was showtime. They ended up having a midnight performance because other performers on Broadway wanted to see the show and they wouldn't be able to unless there was sort of an off time for them to see it. And it had a part, Paul Robeson was a part of the show for a brief time. Josephine Baker was in the show. Florence Mills was in the show. Nat King Cole was in the orchestra pit of one of the revivals in 1933. And so it was this amazing, amazing production, and largely became forgotten over time for reasons that are discussed in the book. And so Sissel and Blake, Noble Sissel and Eubie Blake, were the musicians behind the show. Eubie Blake also conducted in the orchestra pit, and Noble Sissel was an actor in the show as well. And so they were one of the two duos that collaborated for the show, the other being Flournoy Miller and Aubrey Lyles, who were two comedians that met at Fisk University. And so you had these two duos that came together to create this amazing production that lasted 504 performances in Manhattan.
That's exceptional. I mean, that would be notable by today's standards nearly.
Yeah, and just to go back, the 2016 production lasted 100 performances. So I mean, it's astonishing. Shows just did not last that long. Certainly back in the 1920s.
That's amazing. So you mentioned that you couldn't really interview that many people for this book. How did you go about finding all the information? Because this is not a short book. There's a lot of amazing stuff in here. So how did you track it all down?
I carpal tunnel from all the from all the feverish typing. So I did interview a few people. I want to say maybe about 5 people. Mostly they were I interviewed Professor Thomas DeFrance who specializes in social dances, and I wanted to know a little bit about dance that emanated out of Black culture, and so I had a little bit from him for background and things like that. But one of the certainly most notable people that I interviewed was Noble Sissel Jr., who is the son of Noble Sissel, who lives in Florida, and was very much so a willing participant for all of my hours and hours and hours of questions and many, many, many text messages and emails. And he never got tired of me. And if he did, he didn't admit it. And so he was a wonderful asset to this book. And besides that, I think one of the interesting things is that Sissel and Blake and Miller and Lyles were amazing celebrities of the day. And the Black press was really very prevalent in the 1920s and 1930s. So there were all of these Black newspapers, a lot of them based in the East Coast, and you had these major celebrities of the day. So believe it or not, it actually wasn't that hard to sort of track their whereabouts. It would be like if someone 100 years from now wanted to do a biography on Beyonce or something like that. It would be pretty easy to do, I think. But the other thing that was a real asset to me was that several of the main characters in the book had previously unpublished memoirs that I was able to gain access to. And so that provided incredible insight. And some of the stories, a lot of the stories that are in Footnotes really have never appeared anywhere before because they are really, I dug them up. I dug them up and put them in the book here.
That's spectacular. I feel like there are so many stories that would be of the utmost interest to folks like you and me who are total theater nerds, but might not have commercial appeal. And like, there's all these great stories that are out there that I'm like, someone needs to compile them and write them all down. So I'm glad that we can add Footnotes to, though Footnotes does have commercial appeal, of course, but I'm just so grateful for this book. It's absolutely stunning. I want to go back for a minute and learn all about how you became a Broadway fan.
Oh, wow. A Broadway fan specifically. I've always loved theater. I've always loved plays. I did plays in school and things like that. But I think the moment that I really fell in love with Broadway was when I saw Bernadette Peters in Gypsy. And I actually went into the show completely cold. So there are people that listen to the soundtrack to everything before they go see it. They want to be able to hum along. Like there are people that know every word to Hamilton and have never seen it. Like that's just not my style. I like to go into a show knowing as little as possible and just prepare to be, blown away. And so when the first act of Gypsy ended, I was like, but the story's kind of like ended. Like where do we go from here? I was lyrically, that show is brilliant. The story is excellent. It's inspired by real events. And I was just captivated by it. And I think I've always just been in love with the idea that every performance is different because the actors are always different and the audience is always different. And so sometimes the weather affects the show. Sometimes, so there's something about theater that is so living that I think it just makes for the best forum to tell stories. Because if you and I, when we are done with this event, we go and we call someone and we recount this event, we're going to recount it differently. And then if we recount it a week from now, it's going to be different as well, even though we're talking about the same story. And that you get that in theater every day, even though they're bound by the same blocking, script, direction. It's I love it. I love it.
Oh, that's put so beautifully. Oh my goodness, I feel the same. I'm. It's been so long since we've gotten to be in the theater. The center, the theater, our local theater, Center for Performing Arts at Rhinebeck, has built a fantastic outdoor stage that they've brought back for the summer. So I'm psyched. I'm psyched to get back on their lawn.
Nice.
But
what's the first thing that you want to see? Have you decided yet?
I have bought a couple of pairs of tickets.
You have? Oh, tell
Yes.
me. Tell me what's the first, I only want to know what's the first thing that you currently,
Yeah.
the earliest tickets that you have, or the earliest show that you have tickets for.
Okay, the earliest show is actually Mrs. Doubtfire in October. I got tickets. My mom's on the Zoom, by the way. We got tickets to see the first preview because there's something about I really want to be at the first performance back for something.
Yes.
And Mrs. Doubtfire was on my to see list, and I really enjoy Rob McClure.
Yes.
And I love comedy.
New Milford, which is about 10 minutes from my door right now.
Oh, fun. He's just a gem, an absolute gem. So that was the one, though I think it's possible we'll see something before that. I definitely want to get back in to see Hadestown.
Yes, that's what I think it's going to, I haven't bought tickets to anything yet because I feel like it's a very important decision. I haven't decided yet, but I think Hadestown is probably going to be the show for me.
Yeah, I just have goosebumps even thinking about being in the live theater with that group of individuals. Actually, I'll tell you that, and you'll appreciate this, that I'm about to take a cross-country road trip with my husband in a couple of weeks, and we are going to go to St. Louis and see Andre DeShields do King Lear in the park.
Oh my goodness! Oh, that's amazing!
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's
yes,
really cool.
We planned our trip so that we could stop.
That's cool. Stage door, you have to hang out.
Oh my goodness! So tying it back into the book.
Oh yeah, that old thing.
Because we probably should talk a little more about the book at least. So thinking about what we can learn from the story of Shuffle Along, the original.
Mm-hmm.
You said something before we started the event tonight about how there were more Black people working on Broadway in 1921 than there are today. So why? I think we know, but let us know. And B, how are you feeling about where we are right now in 2021, looking forward?
I mean,
it's a big question.
That's a big one, right? You're talking about specifically in the theater industry?
Yeah.
Okay. So there were more there were more Blacks working on Broadway by 1924 than today. And really the reason is well, number one, there were lots of all Black shows in 1924. There were 9 between 1921 and 1924, which is phenomenal. I mean, right? I mean, it's just it's so sad to say this, but you almost couldn't even conceive of that now, could you? I mean, there would be 9 all Black shows on Broadway at whether at one time or within like a 3-year span. And so these were all shows that had huge choruses, multiple choruses, men's choruses, women's choruses, dancing choruses, singing choruses. And so they were all huge productions. The other thing too is that, there's lots of interesting data to support that Broadway now is actually incredibly segregated, although it looks like it is very diverse, where there are shows where, I mean, how many years was Wicked on stage before you had a Black actress as one of the 2 leads? There are plenty of shows where there's never been a Black person in one of the lead roles. Obviously, there are lots of shows that sort of preclude a Black person from being one of the lead characters. And so while there are often lots of brown faces in the ensemble, right, there aren't often many shows that have Black lead characters unless those shows are specifically about the Black experience. There's something like The Color Purple or In the Heights, Hamilton, something like that. No, they're not about the Black experience, but the diversity in the casting is a part of the show with Hamilton, of course. So, I mean, how do I feel about this moment in theater in terms of this racial reckoning that we are in right now? I will tell you, in a way, I think my favorite thing to write about in the book might be the epilogue of the book. And the epilogue really looks at what is the legacy of a show like Shuffle Along when you look at the theater industry today. You know, what have we lost by not remembering that this show existed in 1921? When we think about the Great American Songbook, we don't think of a song like I'm Just Wild About Harry, right? I mean, this is like 1921 sheet music here, but I'm Just Wild About Harry is a song that originates from Shuffle Along. Now, we've heard it from Daffy Duck, Judy Garland, Michigan J. Frog, Al Jolson, you know, Carmen Miranda. We've heard it so many times. It was Harry Truman's presidential reelection campaign song. But if we associated that song with coming out of the Black musical theater tradition, how would that change things? And so I think the theater industry, like every industry, needs to continue to figure out how we can get, number one, decentralize, I think, white voices in spaces. I think that's a huge thing, just make space for people of color and women, I should add as well, because the theater industry is a very male-dominated industry on the back end, from directors and producers and writers. But also, I think there has to be a willingness to invest in properties and take risks. And I think that's the biggest thing. Part of that is just the industry. That's why you have, you know, so many, you know, biopic musicals. That's why you have so many things that are adaptations and revivals, of course. But Shuffle Along was unique. And all of those Black musicals that I mentioned were unique. They were original stories. Miller and Lyles, who were the stars of Shuffle Along, they had several other Broadway shows where they played the same characters, but the shows were completely different stories. We can be doing more of that, and I think the industry really just has to do their part to support that.
Yeah. How do you feel about I feel like in this time that Broadway's been shut down,
Mm-hmm.
there's been a moment for established properties like Phantom of the Opera to take a beat and say that they're going to be casting differently. They're going to be making new choices. We're going to get a Black Christine Daae. Do you feel that is a meaningful thing, or do you feel like it's a little bit too little too late?
Look, I think it's both. I think it's meaningful, but I will tell you, boy, I mean, what a tragedy it is. What an indictment it is of an industry, pardon me, that it needs a global pandemic and watching someone lose their life for 8 minutes and 47 seconds on video to make people consider to have a Black Christine in Phantom. I mean, that's a pretty damning thing. I mean, I'm happy to see it, but I mean, my God, you know, I just like, it's like, you know, it shouldn't be that hard. It shouldn't be that difficult. And yeah, it shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah.
In 2021.
2021. I was excited to see a week or so ago that they announced the first show to reopen on Broadway, or to open in the reopening, is going to be Passover. Have you heard about this?
No, I thought it was Hadestown in September.
No, it's a play written by a Black woman with a Black cast.
I did see this. Yes.
Yes, it's going to open on, sorry, I'm looking it up right now just to be
it's
totally sure. It's going to open in August. So I feel like, I don't know, it's everything can feel like a token, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we need a lot of these things to bring momentum. So I think that's great. And I hope that audiences will go see it. I'm going to try to get tickets because we have to vote with our wallets. If we want to see change, we have to pay some money to get them to realize how important it is.
And I will say, actually, you know, one of the last shows I saw before lockdown was Jeremy O. Harris's Slave Play. And, you know, they did such an amazing thing with that show where they reserved, I don't remember the exact number, I think it was something like 10%, but there was some significant enough percentage of the audience where the tickets were like $30. And it wasn't a lottery. You could just go and buy the tickets. You didn't have to, give an arm or something to go get them. And the idea was that theater needs to be more accessible to people, that not everyone has $200. A show like Hamilton, I'm so glad that it's on Disney Plus, because that is a show that every student should see, every person of color should see, every non-person of color should see. It's just such a watershed moment in theater and just American cultural history at this moment. And to have that show be like $500 for nosebleed seats is so antithetical to what that show should be. I'm sure, like, capitalism, whatever, like, fine. But at some point, art has to be accessible, and you have to be able to tell the story. And so actually, for me, it was, I was very thankful during this period of lockdown that I had the ability to write Footnotes, because I was just like itching for theater. And so I had the ability at least to write about theater in a way that felt fulfilling to me, and also sort of caused me to think about, okay, when we're rebuilding Broadway and what that means, how can we, boy, it's so cliche, right? I was, like, build back better, but like, that's what it is, right? Like, how do we improve upon it when we are reinstating it? And I think there are lots of things that can be done.
Yes, absolutely. And something that I've been thinking more about is, even though we're seeing more diversity on stage, it's the folks behind the scenes, right? And that's something that you talk a lot about it in the book as well. Like the Dreamgirls, great show.
Yes, Dreamgirls is amazing.
Amazing show, but not written by a Black person.
No, not written by a Black person. The Wiz not written by a Black person. It's not lost on me that, Shuffle Along emerged out of this environment that had all of these things going against it that I described, earlier. It played, while it qualified as a Broadway show, it played on 63rd Street because that was the theater they were able to get. They renovated it and made it into a somewhat legitimate theater, but still they were able to command, top ticket pricing for it. But I just think it's so hard. It was important to me. I'm so thankful, actually, in a way, that I wrote this book with what was going on in the world in 2020, with not just the pandemic, but also the racial reckoning after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor's deaths. But also the economic state, Broadway being dark even. There are echoes of all of that in Footnotes. And I actually think the book is significantly better for it, because to me, the book feels very timely, while it is a piece of history, but I couldn't help but draw parallels between the current moment and what was taking place a century ago, because the basic parameters are the same. It's still hard to be a Black artist to stage an original work on Broadway or stage any work on Broadway. There are fewer theater owners now than there were 100 years ago. There's Hugh Jemison. There's just, everything is just more consolidated, borderline monopolized. And so I don't know. It's interesting, and I really I'm thankful as a Black man who loves theater to be able to tell this story too, because I think there is an importance in making space for people of color to tell stories of people of color, and I really am thankful to Source Books, my publisher, for allowing the space for this story to be told.
Yes, absolutely. Source Books is awesome, by the way.
They are awesome. They are amazing. They really are
wonderful. I've been a fan. I've been a fan of them. They're theirs for a while, but I feel like every year they impress me even more with the books they're putting out. So good job, Sourcebook.
I love, and they, and the thing I think is that they really understood that what I wanted to do with this book is that while it was centered on, the nucleus of the book is the show, Shuffle Along, but it was important for me to put it in the historical context. Also, from a racial standpoint, this show debuted on Broadway 1 week before the Tulsa Massacre, which we just recognized, I think, last week. It came out of the greatest period of racialized violence in this country since the Civil War, when Black veterans returned from France after the First World War. And, you had thought leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois saying, Black people should go and fight overseas for America, because certainly when they return home, people will recognize their full citizenship and treat them accordingly. And that is just not what happened. There were lynchings were on the rise. It was the rise of the Klan, and so Shuffle Along emerged in this landscape. And so it was important, and certainly everyone at Sourcebooks understood, it was important to me to not just say, there was a show, it was really important, it was so wonderful, you should learn more about it. But what makes it so astonishing is that it really rose out of the ashes of this just really dark period, that America and specifically New York was in, after the First World War.
That ties really well into a question that we have from Alex. Let me grab it up here. So Alex says, you mentioned that there were 9 all-Black shows on Broadway in the 1920s. Were they all enjoyed by white audiences, or was Shuffle Along unique in breaking through?
Oh, thank you, Alex, for not asking me to name all 9. I thought I was on Family Feud for a second. I was going to get nervous. That's a really great question. They weren't all equally enjoyed by white audiences, and not all by Black audiences either. There were some shows there was a show called The Chocolate Dandies, which was a show that Sissel and Blake did after Shuffle Along, and Josephine Baker was in that show as well. And it was a big budget production. There were white producers behind it, and it was really criticized by a lot of white audience members and reviewers for being too white of a show, with reviewers saying, if I were going to see a white show, why would I ever pay top dollar to see Black people in it? I could just go see white people in a white show. I want a show that is unique and of the Black, experience. Similarly, there were shows that were criticized for being too stereotypical, and Black people didn't go and see them. And so it was interesting. Shuffle Along was unique because it played so many performances, and it also had 2 touring companies. It toured the Deep South. It toured across the United States and Canada. There were plans to take it to London, but no, they weren't all equally enjoyed. The other thing that I should probably mention about what made Shuffle Along so unique is that while, yes, it was very progressive in its use of jazz and ragtime in the score, it also showed Black women on stage for the first time, not in stereotypical roles like Mammy and Jezebel and Sapphire and things like that. But there was also blackface comedy in the show. Miller and Lyles were Black artists who wore blackface in actually a lot of the show. They were the main characters. And so there were only about 4 blackface comedians in the show. Most of the cast was not in blackface. Certainly Sissel and Blake were not. But there was enough stereotypical humor that white audiences could find sort of comfort in it and not feel like they were seeing Black people completely step out of their place in 1920.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I studied theater in college, and what little we covered about musical theater, even the sort of the history of minstrelsy into vaudeville into what we know of now as theater is really fascinating, and I feel like there's a lot there to think about.
There's a lot to think about, and I think one of the as was mentioned earlier, I have a theater company, and so I direct a lot of shows, and I direct shows with my students at the school as well. And one of the things that I always tell my actors is, like, you can't do your job effectively as an actor if you cast judgment on your characters, because my belief is that everyone at all times makes the best decisions for themselves in a given moment. Even if they know they're doing something wrong, they are doing it because it brings them pleasure, or they're doing it out of necessity, or they have justified it in some way to themselves. And so if you are playing a character, you have to find some way to justify it and not look at it with derision. Writing this book was the same exercise for me, and it really was about understanding, why would a Black actor wear blackface and perform for white people for $6 at 8:10 p.m. And really what it was about was, it doesn't seem this way, but it was really kind of a form of resistance, actually, because white actors were certainly wearing blackface, burnt cork, red lipstick, white gloves over hands and things like that, natty wigs. And they were getting paid to essentially make a mockery of Black people. And it didn't take too long before Black people started to say, well, wait a second, look, I can over-exaggerate my speech. I can go out and tell a bunch of jokes. I can go out and tap dance. I can go out and sing. I can go out and talk about life on the old plantation. Many Black actors who wore blackface actually marketed themselves as runaway slaves, even though they weren't. But it was just a marketing ploy, because they knew that white people would pay more to see an authentic Black performance. And so while certainly in 2021, we can look back at this and we can say, like, why would anyone do this? The reality is, if you were a performer, it was a way to get paid significantly more, and also to get in front of white audiences and sort of disrupt what was previously an all-white space. So it's awkward to say, but the reality is that Shuffle Along probably would not have played as many performances, and certainly would not have played the Jim Crow South to rave reviews, I should add, were it not for some of these elements in the show, which, again, I just want to stress, they were in the minority. It wasn't the entire show. It wasn't a minstrel show. But there were certainly some of these elements in it, encased in this great jazz musical.
Fabulous. You mentioned your teacher. So how has this year been for you? But B, are you able to, do you get to teach drama as part of your job in the classroom?
Yeah, so this year has been strange. This year has been strange for everyone, right? In every profession, but this year has been so strange. Students have been amazingly resilient, Teflon, I think. Some of them obviously have had a hard time. I don't want to diminish that, but I think I have seen kids as young as, pre-K and kindergarten have an understanding of the world, and that things aren't always what you anticipate them to be, and have to sort of grapple with that. And it's a tough lesson to learn, but we've had these moments in our history. I have a brother who is significantly younger than I am, and his very first day of school in life was 9/11. That was his first day of school. And so it was just there are these moments where you have to sort of grapple with the world. And so the year has been very weird for me. But in terms of drama, I direct the plays in the musicals I run the drama program at the school. So I do get to work with the students in that capacity. And it is so incredibly fulfilling. And working on this book, I just kept thinking about all of my students and what benefit they would have, not just my students, but every student, every artist, to just know some of this history, because and not just Black students, but Black history is not just for the benefit of Black people. And so I think there is such a value in everyone having a greater sense of this American history, that I had an opportunity to share a slice of in Footnotes.
Oh, fabulous. Well, now we're getting to be closer to that time. So I'll mention if anybody has a question, throw it in the chat or in the ask question.
How could that be?
I know, but I just have to say, I have to thank you for being a theater educator, because my high school drama teacher, Sarah Combs, was the guiding light of my entire high school career. And then also Lou at the center. With that, these people truly shaped who I became as a person and in adulthood. And you are changing. I know it's so cliche. You're changing people's lives, Caseen.
Oh my gosh. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I think there's something about I just love story. That's why I teach English, why I teach drama. It's just I love story, and I think Fred Rogers, if we're talking about cliches and corniness, Fred Rogers has this great quote that there isn't a person that you couldn't learn to love once you've learned their story. And I think that is so important, and that's why I love being able to introduce different stories to students. I think that you gain such empathy through reading. And I think you gain empathy through seeing theater. And I think you gain empathy through performing. And though empathy, I think, to me, if there was a single thing that I think we need more of, I think it's empathy. I think it's a desire and willingness and ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes for half a second and imagine what their day must be like. And so it's so rewarding. It's so rewarding. And I have theater teachers that were important to me, growing up, and just got me to learn so much about myself. And it's an honor to be able to do it and change lives, as you said. I'm going to remind them whenever they don't know their lines for something, I'm going to say, I'm trying to change your life. Get off book. It's going to be my.
I love it. Can you guys did you do a play this year?
We just did one on Sunday.
What was it?
We did a review. So we called it, oh boy, I don't even know we did a review. I won't name drop, but
sure.
But we did a review, and we had a bunch of songs, and they were all songs about finding, all from theater, from Broadway, and about finding connection in kind of dark times and under unusual circumstances. And we did it outside, and it was hot as anything, but it was great.
Oh, I love that. And if there's not something that's going to bring connection for people, connection to the past, connection to our future, connection to theater, man, gosh, we really need that right now. It's been too long. Let's see, we have something else popped up in the question. Ooh, here's another question. Sorry, just
no, I saw I haven't seen the question yet.
Sorry.
It excited me.
It looks interesting. How's the world of YouTube and TikTok stardom affected teaching drama? Another great question from Alex.
Wow.
That's a good one.
That is such an interesting question. And I will tell you, from where I sit, it hasn't actually. Now, I know that sounds kind of unbelievable, but we, our theater program, we're still on stage. The kids will write sometimes, but I don't have, at least as far as I know, I don't have any kids that are like YouTube celebrities or TikTok celebrities. But I will name drop for a second here, actually, because one of my former drama students was the first person I knew who was like a social media, I'll say like influencer before that was even a term. And she is Barbie Ferreira, who is on Euphoria on HBO, and she plays Kat, and she was named one of Time Magazine's like top 10 teens of like the year, and along with like Malia Obama and Malala, and I mean seriously in the same year. It was actually kind of like amazing, and she was my Patty Simcox in Greece once upon a time ago. So
I love that.
She really used the internet to great stardom. That's really how she got started, and it was amazing because she was still in high school when things were starting to take off for her. And you hear these stories, whether it's like Justin Bieber or all these other people, but I remember other kids kind of being like, Barbara's famous, and we were the other the teachers would kind of be like, I don't think she's famous. But little did we know.
Little did we know.
She's got an she's co-starring on an HBO series. So God love her. She's doing great.
That's awesome. Good for her. Good for you.
Thanks.
You get a little credit.
I can say confidently that she knew what she wanted to do, and she went for it, and just turned out so excellently, and I'm just so proud of her.
I love it. Well, thank you for all of your incredible work as a teacher, as a writer, as a historian. It's been so fun to talk to you tonight. Thank you
it's been amazing talking to you. And can I just make one appeal? I just want to, to everyone who's tuning in, I can't stress enough. Please, 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 if you haven't picked up Footnotes yet, pick it up at Oblong, please, because I've been up to Rhinebeck actually before, believe it or not. I went on a walk through the woods in Rhinebeck, actually, once upon a time ago. Actually, that's a whole nother story.
I love it.
But, seriously, support your local bookstore. It's so incredibly important. And by purchasing Footnotes at Oblong, you are also supporting the center. And I can tell you, as someone who has a community theater, there is nothing, you don't know the value of a community theater to a community until it is gone. So anything that you can do, whether it's seeing shows, donating, just support and build up the community. So I am so happy that some of the proceeds from Footnotes is going to that cause, and pick up your copy there. And I think there are signed copies, right? There are book plates.
We do. We have signed book plate copies. Yep. And it's the buy the book button. It's right there. Or go to oblongbooks.com. Caseen, you're the best. I hope we get to meet in person someday.
Yes, I will go. We will go walk through the woods in Rhinebeck. I'll go back on a return trip.
It's a date.
We should go see a show. You have to let me know when you're back in Manhattan, and we'll go.
You got it. It's a deal. You're the best. Right. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much. Take care.